Well, good morning and welcome. This is Erin Neinhauser with the Pennsylvania Health Access Network. We're very excited to have you all join us today for the part 2 of our series with Community Legal Services on helping immigrants and refugees apply for health insurance. So last Thursday we had an excellent presentation from Mary Pat and Lydia from Community Legal Services, giving us a really good in-depth overview of different immigration statuses, what coverage options people are eligible for based on their status, how to identify and help someone through the process based on their unique situation. And today we're going to really get down into sort of the nitty-gritty of the kind of stuff that we're all dealing with on the front lines as enrollment assisters, and talk about troubleshooting and some tips and tricks to navigate some of the more common barriers that immigrants and refugees face through the enrollment process with both the Medicaid, the marketplace, and with Medicaid. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Because the presentation is going to cover a lot of really great information and probably address a lot of the questions that you all might have, we're actually going to wait until the end to take questions. So as we're going through, you can submit questions at any point using the GoToWebinar control panel. Just open up the question tab and type in your question. We can receive those throughout the whole presentation, and then we'll get to as many as we can, probably all of them, at the end. We have allotted an hour and a half for this training, so we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion. And we also want to hear from all of you if there are tips or techniques that you use to help people, particularly with the marketplace, troubleshoot issues with coverage, identity, and document verification. We really want to hear from you so that we're all aware of the best practices that we've all developed as an sister community. Also, we have shared some of the handouts for this presentation in the GoToWebinar control panel. You can click on them. If you're having trouble accessing any of them there, don't worry. We're going to send out both the PowerPoint, the supplemental materials, and we're also right now taking a recording of this session. So we'll again upload it to YouTube and put everything in a shared folder so that everyone can access all the materials that we cover and all the information that we covered today. So those are all the housekeeping notes that I had. Let me introduce Mary Pat Pileggi, who is our main presenter today. Mary Pat is an attorney with Community Legal Services. She joined CLS in 2007 as a staff attorney, and she works in their public benefits unit. Mary Pat works with clients to resolve their legal problems that arise in many different government benefit programs, and she's just an incredible expert, one of the top Medicaid experts in the state, and we're very lucky to have her with us today. She has an incredible gift for both knowing the really hard policy stuff and also being able to communicate it in a way that makes sense. That's why we've invited her, and we're very excited to have her with us today. So with that, I am going to start the slideshow here and turn it over to Mary Pat. Let's see here.
Okay, thanks so much, Erin, and hi, everyone. I'm glad to see so many people joining us today. I'm going to be presenting today with my colleague Lydia Gottesfeld, hopefully. She'll be able to join us. She has some hearings this morning, but she might be able to join on later in the presentation. So today we're going to talk about, hopefully kind of pick up where we left off on Thursday. On Thursday we had a presentation that really got into the details about which immigrants are eligible for which programs, and today we're going to talk about some of the barriers that these immigrants face when they're trying to enroll in the programs that they are eligible for. Erin, do I have control of this? I'm having trouble.
You do, I think. Why don't I go ahead and do it if we're having a...
Okay, yeah, I'm
Oh, there you go.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Now I'm too far ahead. Let me get back, I think. Okay, so just a quick overview of what we're going to do today, what we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a quick review of what we talked about on Tuesday about which immigrants can get which types of health insurance programs that are available. And then we'll talk in more detail about medical assistance coverage, barriers to enrollment there, and then some advocacy tips for you all as you handle these medical assistance cases. And then do the same for FFM, the health insurance marketplace, barriers to enrollment there, and some advocacy tips. You know, with the marketplace, in particular, as Erin said, we really are interested in hearing from you all too, the people on the ground who are dealing with the marketplace applications hands-on. We here at Community Legal Services, we're a legal aid program. We represent low-income folks, so we tend to do medical assistance and focus there. We do some marketplace cases, but not nearly as many as you all do. So if you all have some tips about how to handle some of these barriers to enrollment that we'll identify today, we're very happy to hear about them. And then last, we'll talk about moving between these two bureaucracies, between medical assistance and the marketplace. So a quick overview of which immigrants can access which of these health insurance programs. Within medical assistance, we have these kind of three different pockets of coverage. We have federally funded medical assistance, and if you remember from Tuesday or from Thursday, the immigrants who can get these types of medical assistance programs are limited. You have to be a qualified immigrant who's either exempt from the 5-year bar or who has been here has had qualified status for at least 5 years in the United States. And if you're not qualified, you have to be a lawfully present kid or pregnant woman. For state-funded medical assistance, which you might recall is a very small program, very low income limits, so limited in who in the whole universe of people can get state-funded medical assistance. Within that limited universe, the immigration status requirements limit it even further. You have to be a qualified immigrant, you have to be crew-call, or you have to be lawfully present. If you are undocumented, you cannot get state-funded MA. Your only option if you're undocumented is emergency medical assistance. But then in addition to undocumented folks, other immigrants whose status restricts them from getting either state-funded or federally funded medical assistance might also be eligible for emergency medical assistance if they have a very serious health concern and need treatment quickly. Marketplace coverage is a little more straightforward when it comes to immigration status requirements, but still has some complexity. So all qualified and lawfully present immigrants over 138% of federal poverty level can purchase insurance on the marketplace. And then those 5-year barred qualified immigrants and the lawfully present folks who are not pregnant adults, who are under 138% of poverty, can also purchase insurance on the marketplace with subsidies. And the reason this group can purchase health insurance on the marketplace with subsidies is because their immigration status makes them ineligible for federal Medicaid. So they're shut out of Medicaid, but it's kind of a consolation prize. They can purchase insurance on the marketplace with subsidies. All right. So we're going to start with medical assistance, talk about some enrollment barriers there. Medical assistance is administered through the state of Pennsylvania. It's administered on the local level at the county assistance offices. Folks can apply for medical assistance at their local county assistance office, online via Compass, or through the mail. And once that application is received, the county assistance office has to make a decision on the application within 30 days, although applications can be expedited. If an application is submitted for medical assistance with proof that an emergency medical condition exists, that application is supposed to be processed within 5 days, not 30. This rarely happens. For anyone who's handling emergency medical assistance applications, you know this rarely happens, but there is policy that requires it, and wanted to mention that to you all. Keep in mind, if you are handling medical assistance applications for people with emergencies. So these are some of the prime enrollment barriers for immigrants that we see with medical assistance. There are a whole host of verification issues that everyone who applies for medical assistance face, but for immigrants, these are the big ones: verifying immigration status, verifying income, and then dealing with questions about Social Security numbers. Immigrants are especially concerned about applying for medical assistance. They're concerned about privacy and confidentiality. They're concerned about whether applying for medical assistance will have some negative result for them in terms of their immigration status, or dealing with federal immigration officials. Language access is a huge problem for immigrants. For those who are limited English proficiency, just communicating with the folks at the County Assistance Office can be a real barrier. As I'm sure many of you know, immigrant families often include folks with a variety of immigration statuses, and so getting medical assistance for the eligible members of those households can be a challenge, because it's very confusing for both the people applying and for the people at the County Assistance Office to figure out what rules apply to those households, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk just a little bit about some special issues that make it very difficult for people to apply for and actually obtain emergency medical assistance. So immigration status. Folks dealing with immigrants know that the County Assistance Office will sometimes wrongfully deny benefits to immigrants just because of their status, and there are a number of reasons for that. First is immigration status is very confusing. I did my best to kind of lay out the framework of immigration status and how to figure out what somebody's status is during our last webinar on Thursday, but there's no way around it. It is confusing. It's confusing for immigrants, and it's confusing for the people at the County Assistance Office. The caseworkers at the County Assistance Office, if they're able to figure out what someone's status is, then get confused about what rules apply to different groups of immigrants. And those rules are sometimes difficult to understand. They're not always clearly laid out in DHS policy. And then to make things even worse, there are some ways in which DHS's computer system just doesn't accurately identify the eligibility of certain groups of immigrants. So for some groups, especially those who are lawfully present but not qualified, the County Assistance Office will have to do a special workaround within their computer to get Medicaid turned on for those folks, because the computer doesn't automatically recognize these groups as eligible. These two bullet points at the end on this slide are two examples of the ways in which DHS's computer system is not up to date. It doesn't accurately reflect the eligibility of lawfully present kids and pregnant women who are potentially eligible for federal Medicaid. And then it also the computer system does not recognize the eligibility of lawfully present adults who are not pregnant for state-funded MA. So for each of these two groups, if I'm helping somebody who falls within one of these groups, it's really helpful to just arm yourself with the policy that it lays out and explains how these folks are eligible, so that the caseworker handling that application knows that they might have to go in and do a manual workaround of their system to get MA on for these two. And these two policies, Operations Memorandum 120502 for lawfully present kids and pregnant women, and then the Information Memorandum that spells out eligibility for state-funded MA, or both part of your handouts today. So you should have them on hand. So if you're working with these groups, use them, please, to get your clients on. So verifying immigration status. This is difficult in part because, you know, keeping track of paper for anybody is difficult, especially all the paper that you need in order to get a medical assistance application processed. But identifying the right piece of paper that the county assistance office might need to verify immigration status is also very confusing, not only for the immigrant but also for the county assistance office. The first thing to note is that only eligible immigrants who are actually applying for medical assistance should ever need to verify status. So if you have an immigrant who is applying for somebody else, not applying for themselves, that immigrant who's applying for another person should not have to verify his or her own status. The only person who needs to verify status is the person who's applying, who actually wants to get medical assistance. So for undocumented people who do not have status to verify, they should never be asked what their status is. They should never be asked for a piece of paper to prove that they're undocumented, because that's ridiculous. There's no reason why an undocumented person should ever have to reveal to the county assistance office that they're undocumented. The only thing they need to say is that they have a status that makes them ineligible for benefits. So if you have an undocumented mom applying for her U.S. citizen kid, for example, she should be able to submit that application without ever being confronted by the county assistance office or otherwise asked about what her individual status is. But for those people who do have an eligible status, an eligible immigration status, and are in fact applying for medical assistance, these people will have to do something to verify what their status is. The easiest thing to do is to provide their immigration documents showing what their status is, and this could be a number of documents. It could be, if the person applying is a lawful permanent resident, it could be their green card, otherwise known as the I-551. If they do not have lawful permanent resident status, but they are employment authorized, they could provide a copy of their employment authorization card. If they have their I-94, which is also known as an arrival or departure record, they could provide a copy of that. A court order from an immigration judge. The big group of people who I see who have those court orders are people who have been granted asylum recently, but have not yet become lawful permanent residents, so they have their immigration court order verifying their asylum status. And then for people who are people who have naturalized are now U.S. citizens, their naturalization certificate will prove that they are a U.S. citizen. If they don't have their certificate, the United States passport, if they happen to have one of those, will verify their citizenship. If you don't have any document, and some people don't, the county assistance office should be able to use just somebody's alien registration number, which is also known as a USCIS number or an A number, to ask SAVE to verify the person's status. And SAVE is the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements program. It's a computer communication system where our DHS, the Department of Human Services in Pennsylvania, communicates with the United States DHS, United States Department of Homeland Security, to verify that somebody has the immigration status that they're saying they have. And the county assistance office should be able to make that inquiry via SAVE just with an A number. Now, if somebody has a document, they should provide the document because it just makes the whole process a whole lot easier. But in those situations where there just is no document, but somebody remembers their A number, provide the A number, and ask for this SAVE verification with the A number. Now, there are some folks out there who don't have documents and they don't know what their A number is. They got nothing. Unfortunately, in those situations, I think the only thing to do is to submit a FOIA request to USCIS for their copies, for the federal immigration officials' copies of the immigration documents for your client. You only want to do that when when your client is clear about what their status is, and they just don't have the paper to prove it. And it does take time. It can take at least a month, I believe, to get responses to FOIA requests. But just to put that out there, that is an option for people who really do not have any documentation or any way to prove what their status is. All right, income can be very difficult for immigrants to prove. And it can be difficult for lots of low-income folks to prove. But immigrants in particular seem to have trouble proving what their income is. They tend to, it's more likely for immigrants, it seems, to be in informal employment relationships. So if there are pay stubs or a letter from an employer to submit, that's always the way to go. But if that is not possible, the County Assistance Office should accept a sworn statement written by the immigrant, him or herself. So this is a statement where the immigrant says, I am working, this is what I make, I cannot get any other proof of my income because blank. You fill in the blank. And the blank could be filled in with a number of reasons. For my clients, it's often I've asked my employer for a letter and they refuse to give it to me. I asked my employer for a letter a long time ago, and he said if I ever ask him for anything like it again, I'll be fired. It could be a number of things for why they cannot get some proof of their income from their employer. We have a template for one of these sworn statements in our handouts. The more detail you can add in your statement, the better, the more credible your client statement will be if it's detailed. And then there are some folks who just have no income at all. And the County Assistance Office will want to know how that person is living, how they're supporting themselves without any income. So that could be verification of that management without income could be a letter from the person who's providing support. So if somebody has no income but is living with their aunt who's letting them live there for free and is buying them food while they don't have any income, it could be a letter from the aunt. But if it's that the person just isn't managing, that they're homeless, then it could be a letter from the person themselves. If it's that they have no current income but they're living off of some savings that they have in the bank account, it could be a sworn statement from the individual explaining that something. The County Assistance Office will want something to explain how this person is living without any income at all. All right. Social Security numbers. Again, just like immigration status, the only people who need to provide and prove a Social Security number to the County Assistance Office are those who are actually applying for medical assistance. So that undocumented mom who's applying for her U.S. citizen kid does not have to provide a Social Security number, should not be asked for a Social Security number in order to apply for her child. If the applicant, him or herself, so if that kid doesn't have a Social Security number, the County Assistance Office has to help that person apply for a Social Security number. Once the person goes in to apply for the Social Security number, the County Assistance Office cannot deny or delay medical assistance for that person. These procedures are all laid out in DHS policy in the supplemental handbook. Many of you out there might be familiar with the medical assistance handbook. In addition to the medical assistance handbook, there's also a supplemental handbook that has policies that apply throughout all of the benefits programs that DHS administers. So throughout the medical assistance, cash assistance, and food stamps policies, there's this supplemental handbook that applies to all of them. And Chapter 950 deals with Social Security numbers. So if you haven't taken a look at that, take a look at that. So some immigrants, recent immigrants in particular, might be here and not yet have a Social Security number. Some immigrants might be here and not be eligible for a Social Security number, independent of the need for the Social Security number to apply for medical assistance. So there are, for example, lawfully present kids, because they won't be applying, they don't need a Social Security number in order to work, which is the typical reason why people would be applying for a Social Security number. They very well may be applying for medical assistance without a Social Security number or without an application for a Social Security number in the works. For those kids, they will need to go to the Social Security office usually with a letter from the county assistance office that says this person needs to apply for a Social Security number so that they can apply for and get Medicaid. The county assistance office has to help that kid's family through that process, and then approve medical assistance if they're otherwise eligible once the application for the Social Security number is submitted. So it requires some communication with the county assistance office, some cooperation from the county assistance office, and some understanding at the county assistance office of their own policy in the supplemental handbook on Social Security numbers. Sometimes requires some advocacy at the county assistance office to get them to do what they need to do to get this person their Social Security number. So privacy and confidentiality, this is, like I said, a big concern for immigrants. There's a lot of fear in the immigrant community just generally, but especially when they're walking into government offices and asking for benefits, it's good to be able to reassure them that the county assistance office does not report to immigration officials. They are not in the business of turning people in to immigration officials. That's not their job. It's not what they do. They won't do it. And like I said before, and it's important, I think, to reiterate it, for undocumented people, there is no reason why they should ever be asked what their status is, and there's no reason why they should ever have to reveal their status to the county assistance office. Again, the only thing they have to say is, my status makes me ineligible for benefits except for EMA. So if an undocumented person is applying for EMA, they still do not have to reveal that they're undocumented. They just have to say, my status makes me ineligible for all benefits except for emergency medical assistance. Language access. This is a major barrier for a lot of immigrants applying for medical assistance. Under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, you know, it's the same old Civil Rights Act from 1964 that many of us might know as the law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of race. It also prohibits discrimination on the basis of national origin. And the Supreme Court said a long time ago that when an entity fails to provide language access, they are discriminating on the basis of national origin and violating the Civil Rights Act. So under the Civil Rights Act, and also under a number of state laws, the Department of Human Services and the county assistance offices have to provide meaningful language access to limited English proficient folks. And that could mean a whole slew of things. And it certainly includes these things listed here. There has to be some notice provided to limited English proficient people that language services are available, and give those people some way to ask for language services. So usually the way county assistance offices do this is they put those I speak cards up at the front desk with a number of languages that people can point to indicate what their language is. There also has to be competent bilingual staff or interpreters provided. And then translation of vital documents for those large minority languages. Vital documents is defined pretty broadly. It, at the very least, includes applications for benefits, notices of eligibility or denial or termination of benefits. And for the large minority languages, so certainly Spanish in most communities, and then in places like Philadelphia, it might also include languages like Vietnamese, Cambodian, Russian, Chinese. Like I said, DHS regulation, the law in Pennsylvania, also requires many of these things, but then also DHS policy requires these things. Many years ago now, it seems, in 2002 and 2004, DHS really started paying attention to their obligations under Title VI and issued some policy around language access. These policies listed here, the OIM LEP guidelines and the operations memorandum are in your handouts. What's problematic is that since these policies have been issued, there really hasn't been much that's happened since. So we still see a lot of language access problems despite these policies. The Medical Assistance Handbook also has one small piece of this policy in there, and it requires notices of MA eligibility, termination, denial to be issued in a language easily understood by the recipient of that notice. But like I said, we still have, despite these policies and despite the law, we still have a lot of problems with language access at county assistance offices. There are, even though each county assistance office has phone interpretation services available, they're not used all that frequently. Within the offices themselves, there are a limited number of phones, kind of these dual handset phones that they use to communicate with people using phone interpreters. The people at the county assistance office will very often rely on friends or family members that people bring into the office to interpret, which is problematic for a number of reasons. There are very few translated documents offered to limited English proficient people. And then the county assistance offices don't always do a great job of documenting people's language needs. So even if somebody checks off the box on an application that says that they speak Cambodian, that need for Cambodian language services is not consistently documented in the person's case record narrative or in ESIS, in the county assistance office's computer system, so that the next person who touches that case doesn't necessarily know that they need Cambodian language services. We'll talk again about, when we get to the advocacy tips for all of this stuff. How do you handle all of these problems in a few minutes. So mixed status households, they are confronted with a special mix of barriers. And we've said this already, but I'll say it again. Only those people in a mixed status household with eligible immigration status and who are applying need to provide Social Security numbers or immigration status verification. Nobody else should be asked to do that. The immigration status of household members, though, will not change income counting rules, right? So the income of ineligible or non-applicant household members may still need to be counted and verified. And the two big examples of that are an applicant's spouse or the parents of an applicant child. If you have an eligible immigrant who's applying for MA and is married to and living with an undocumented person, that undocumented spouse will need to provide information and verify their income as part of their eligible immigrant spouse's medical assistance application. And the same thing for an applicant child. A U.S. citizen kid of an undocumented mom will need to have an application that includes information about and verification of her mom's income. Just because somebody's undocumented doesn't mean they don't need to provide that income and the proof of income in the application for their eligible household members. EMA, emergency medical assistance, presents some special issues. The EMA application process, although we have this rule that requires expedited processing, it's very often delayed. The reason for that is that the county assistance offices, for the most part, are not making eligibility determinations at the local level. They're taking the applications and then sending up the medical documentation to a separate group of DHS employees out in Harrisburg who review the medical records and make a determination about whether an emergency medical condition exists. And so there are additional steps that DHS is taking with these applications that often end up in delays. The application process is difficult because there isn't a whole lot of information provided to people to tell them how to go about applying, what kind of medical documentation is needed, what types of conditions will be covered. None of this is clearly stated in policy anywhere. And so it becomes very difficult for people to even know how to apply for EMA in a way that will give them a shot at getting EMA. For those people who are eventually approved, DHS does not approve EMA for any more than 6 months. So these folks are on a different kind of renewal track than typical MA recipients. And then at the end of those 6 months, DHS does a pretty bad job of sending out the advance notice that they should be sending out before EMA is terminated at the end of those 6 months, or 5 months, 4 months, 3 months, however long EMA has been approved for. And to make things worse, when notices are sent out, they're often the wrong notice that's being sent. So the notice that's sent may not say, we want to terminate your emergency medical assistance because we believe your emergency medical condition is ending. It might say something like, we're terminating your medical assistance because your income has changed when it hasn't changed. So it makes things very confusing and difficult for people to navigate. All right, so we've identified all these problems. What do we do about them? Here, our main advocacy tip is always to appeal. Appeal, appeal, appeal. Our motto generally is appeal now, think later. And the reason for that is that the appeal deadlines are very short. So you want to get the appeal in now as soon as possible. And if it turns out that your appeal is meritless, then you can always withdraw it and without anybody blinking an eye. And very often appeals are not meritless. There very often are lots of good reasons to appeal, lots of reasons why your appeal will be settled without a hearing. You want to file an appeal for a number of reasons. It preserves your client's rights to any missed benefits. So if you're dealing with an individual whose medical assistance was terminated, if they walk into the county assistance office and say, my medical assistance was terminated, how do I get it back on? Very often they'll be told to just submit a new application, which could work out for some people. But what ends up happening is you have now missed some period of time where you are without medical assistance, where appeals can work to keep your medical assistance on, or if you do suffer a termination, you can get retroactive medical assistance to cover you for the time when you were off. Appeals buy you time to provide missing verification. So instead of having to start the whole application process over, you're just buying yourself a little extra time to get that one piece of paper that might work to resolve the whole issue and get your medical assistance turned back on. Like I said, many appeals can be settled prior to a hearing. There are some exceptions to that. Emergency medical assistance appeals very often cannot be settled without a hearing, and you might need to refer more EMA cases to a lawyer than other MA cases. But with the exception of that, many of these appeals can be settled without a hearing. And appeals give the county assistance office more incentive to fix your issue, right? So if the folks at the county assistance office know that if they don't pay attention to your issue and fix your issue, they're going to have to go down to the Bureau of Hearings and Appeals and deal with that whole process with the administrative law judges and submitting evidence and making their argument before the judge. They're going to want to pay attention to your issue just to avoid that. Appealing is pretty easy. Each of the notices that DHS issues comes with an appeal page. You can fill out that page and submit it to the county assistance office. If you don't have a notice, you can use a generic appeal form. And our flyer, which is in your handouts, explains in detail how you can fill out the appeal page or use a generic appeal form if there is no notice. And like I said, you want to appeal quickly. If you're dealing with a termination of medical assistance and you get that appeal in within 10 days from the date of the notice, you can keep your benefits, keep medical assistance on while the appeal is pending, which is a great benefit for people. If you miss those 10 days, you have a total of 30 days to file an appeal. So these are pretty short deadlines for appeals, which is why we say just get the appeal in and then think about it, or get to a lawyer if you need one later after the appeal is filed. Some tips related to language access. We put in every document we submit to the county assistance office on behalf of our clients, on behalf of our limited English proficient clients, we be sure to put on there that our client is limited English proficient and we request language services in the client's language. And then after we make those requests, the next time we're talking with the county assistance office, we're sure to ask that whether the county assistance office has accurately coded our client with as limited English proficient and in the right language. What we believe, the last time we saw a demonstration of ESIS, the way we believe this works in the county assistance office's computer system is that when somebody, when the clerk is looking at a medical assistance application for the first time and they see the box checked off that says, I'm a Spanish speaker, I need Spanish language services, what the clerk will need to do is go to a drop-down box and select Spanish, which is good. The problem is that that box defaults to English, right? So if nobody ever touches it, or nobody ever thinks to look at that box on the computer screen, it will just default to English, and the clerk can just click right past that screen with English sitting there. And we found that happens a lot. And so if you've helped somebody submit an application and now you're on the phone with the customer service center or with a caseworker talking about that client's case, always a good idea to ask, is this person coded for Spanish? And if the answer is no, you say, well, please change it now. That's a big problem with the coding. Clients should be sent notice in a language they understand. When they are not sent notice in a language that they understand, that can justify an untimely appeal. So if somebody's medical assistance has been terminated and the only notice they've received is an English notice, and they speak Spanish, and they read Spanish, then you can submit that appeal whether it's past the 10-day or the 30-day deadline, and assert in your appeal that medical assistance should be turned right back on because this person was never sent notice in Spanish. Know the rules if you can, right? The rules are publicly available in the Medical Assistance Handbook, in the Supplemental Handbook. Having these operations memoranda and policy clarifications that set out some of the rules that are often forgot, like the rules on lawful presence, is always very helpful. Use the chain of command. So if you're talking with a caseworker who's not giving you the answer you need, talk with that caseworker supervisor. If that supervisor isn't responding, keep going up. Each supervisor has a supervisor. And then at the very top, there is one person who's in charge of each one of these county assistance offices. If you need to, go to that person. The names and the phone numbers for senior staff in each county are publicly available in the Commonwealth Directory. The Commonwealth Directory is a directory of telephone numbers that's published by the Department of General Services. It's updated somewhat frequently. I don't know, I think maybe once or twice a year. But it's useful if you need to get in touch with somebody who's in charge in your county. And then use the Change Center, or the Customer Service Center as it's now known. These folks can give you just kind of basic information about what's going on in your client's case. They can tell you which language your client is coded for. They can change the language code if you need it. They can be useful for just really basic information if that's all you need. All right. So moving off from medical assistance into the health insurance marketplace. Marketplace is a very different animal, right? It's administered not by the state, but by the federal government. Applications, as you all know, I'm sure, are submitted online or over the phone. And then there's this idea that there should be real-time eligibility determinations made. And this relies heavily on the data hub behind healthcare.gov, where there's lots of information shared, and that information sharing is supposed to lead to an eligibility determination that happens quickly and without a whole lot of paper being shuffled. But sometimes it doesn't always work that way, as we know, especially for immigrants. These are some of the barriers that we have found immigrants will face when applying for or trying to maintain coverage on the marketplace. We have these verification problems again with immigration status, identity, income. We have language access problems, privacy and confidentiality, and then some issues specific to mixed status families. Verifying immigration status. Again, the SAVE is used by the marketplace, the same program that our Pennsylvania DHS uses to verify immigration status. It's used only to verify the status of applicant family members, not ineligible immigrants who are not applying for coverage. And it's used only to verify status for benefits eligibility purposes, not to enforce immigration laws. In 2013, ICE, which is Immigration Customs and Enforcement, issued a pretty helpful memo on this that just really clearly says that when people give information to the marketplace about their immigration status, that information will not be used to deport people. It won't be used by ICE to enforce immigration laws. It'll only be used to verify somebody's eligibility for benefits on the marketplace. That memo is in your handouts also. I have found that it's pretty useful when you're dealing with a client who's afraid to even enter into healthcare.gov, even go onto the website for fear that it will result in some negative immigration consequence. It's useful to have that memo on hand. So anyone who has helped an immigrant through the marketplace application process knows that it can be pretty daunting. There are a number of numbers that people need to know or find in order to be able to use the kind of real-time eligibility world of immigration status verification. And the system had a number of flaws that resulted in even people who had their numbers ready to go could not get saved to automatically and accurately verify what their status was. So these are some of the numbers that people are asked to enter in during the application process. Their alien registration number, which is also known as the A or USCIS number, the card number, so each person with a green card or a work authorization card will have, the card itself has a number. In addition to the A number, which is also listed on the card has a card number. The receipt number on a notice of action, and a notice of action, also known as an I-797, is just a notice from federal immigration officials about some action that they've taken on somebody's case. So, for instance, when immigration officials receive an application for asylum, they will send out an I-797 that says, "We've received your application for asylum." And each one of those notices has a receipt number, I-94 number, and then the naturalization certificate number for U.S. citizens. All of these numbers are relevant during the application process, and I'm not going to go through these in detail. We looked carefully at each of these documents during the webinar last week, so hopefully you all saw that and can go back and look at those slides if you're having trouble remembering what each of these documents are. So what do you do in this situation where you don't have all of these numbers that the application is asking for? It is possible to select Other under the Documents drop-down menu and enter just an A number or just the I-94 number. And just like with medical assistance, where the county assistance office should be able to just take somebody's A number and send it through SAVE to verify status, it should be possible here too for SAVE to do the same thing with just an A number. Doesn't always work out that way, but it is something to try if you don't have all your document numbers. So when SAVE cannot automatically verify someone's status, this results in an inconsistency. That's what they call this thing that happens when the applicant is saying they have one status, but the verification that they've provided does not match up with what they're telling the marketplace. There's an inconsistency. And for the most part, these inconsistencies may be resolved by the immigrant sending in a copy of their immigration document to the marketplace. Identity verification. Experian, the marketplace uses data from Experian, which is a credit reporting agency, to verify someone's identity. So The person submitting the application on the marketplace is known as the household contact, and Experian will, at the very beginning of the application, use information entered to verify the identity of the household contact. And when Experian can't do this, the person has to follow up by submitting paper, submitting copies of identity documents that prove that they are who they say they are. Now, since Experian is a credit reporting agency, people with limited credit history are more likely to not be able to verify their identity automatically and will have to submit documents. This includes our folks, a lot of recently arrived immigrants, some low-income individuals, and undocumented immigrants who are applying for eligible household members. I know there were big problems with Experian not providing language services for folks when they called to figure out what they needed to do to verify identity. I have heard that that has improved and that Experian is now providing language services, so that's a positive development. For those folks who do not have the identity documents that they need, they can't submit an application online. They can go ahead and apply on phone or over the phone or on paper, but the online application process isn't available to them. Verification of income. So because the marketplace uses this data hub to do a lot of this real-time eligibility work, people without Social Security numbers are less likely to be able to verify their income automatically. The data hub uses Social Security numbers to look through IRS data to verify that people's income is what they say it is. They cannot use an ITIN to verify income, so people who are filing taxes using ITINs, individual tax identification numbers, instead of Social Security numbers, can't use the data hub. And unfortunately, that means a lot of undocumented people who are filing taxes cannot use the data hub to verify their income. But then a lot of people who are in more informal work situations, people who haven't filed taxes, they also cannot electronically verify their income using the data hub. And they must submit other proof of their income. Now, this proof of income, you know, if we have the typical pay stubs, that's great. The marketplace should allow some level of flexibility for people who have more informal work situations and may not have pay stubs, but might have letters from employers or other proof of income. Whatever that proof is, it has to be provided to the marketplace. Immigrant access to marketplace subsidies. Now, there have been a whole lot of problems, especially for immigrants under 138% of federal poverty level. And these folks are still facing some challenges getting approved for subsidies. These folks, you know, but for their immigration status, they'd be eligible for Medicaid. And the marketplace just is not doing a really good job separating out these immigrants from the rest of the Medicaid eligible population. And so they will just recognize this group as Medicaid eligible and tell them that because they're Medicaid eligible, they're ineligible for marketplace coverage with subsidies. The marketplace will then refer them over for Medicaid eligibility determinations at the county assistance offices, even though these folks, because of their immigration status, are ineligible for Medicaid. The marketplace started this question within the application recently that says, you know, have you been denied Medicaid? And when you answer no to that question, you can then get over this hump. The problem is that you actually need to be have received the Medicaid denial in order to truthfully answer no to this question on the application. And so sometimes folks will have to go through this whole process where they've struggled through the marketplace application only to be sent over to the county assistance office to struggle with the Medicaid application process and then have to wait for a Medicaid denial so they can go back to the marketplace, answer no to this question, and then finally get to a place where they can purchase marketplace health insurance with the subsidies they're eligible for. For folks that have been referred, it I think makes sense to independently apply for Medicaid, get on the phone with the county assistance office and say, we need a Medicaid denial quickly. If you have a connection at your local county assistance office, making those requests can be easier than if you don't. So one advocacy tip is, if you're dealing with one county assistance office over and over again, develop a relationship there if you can. There very often is at least one person at each county assistance office who understands their rules and is reasonable and will communicate with you if they know that you are dealing with a sizable Medicaid applicant population. Language access, same law, same federal law, Civil Rights Act applies to the federal marketplace just like it applies to county assistance offices. It also applies to the health plans offered on the marketplace. The call center can connect, has phone interpretation services available in 150 languages. Notices are a different story. They're using taglines, but for the most part, the notices we've seen have been in English. So still some problems there with language access. The Affordable Care Act and its regulations include very strong privacy protections, so people can feel confident that the information they provide to the marketplace will only be used to evaluate households for marketplace eligibility purposes. This information isn't being shared with federal immigration officials. Mixed status families, again, ineligible immigrants can safely apply for and get health care for the eligible members of their families. Agencies must not ask about the immigration status of anyone who is not applying for coverage. Only applicants have to provide Social Security numbers, and only if they have one. Of course, if they do have one, we strongly encourage people to provide them. It makes the application process a whole lot easier, right? Because now the data hub can actually work for people with Social Security numbers to some extent. Ineligible non-applicant immigrants must provide a Social Security number only if they have one, and they are applying for subsidies for eligible members of their households, right? So if you have an immigrant who's, the tax filer in a household, and they're applying for, and they have a Social Security number, and they're applying for eligible dependents within their household, they will have to provide their Social Security number in order to get premium tax credits, cost sharing reductions to help them pay for health care coverage for the eligible people in their household. Non-applicants who apply for and receive marketplace subsidies for their eligible household members must file taxes even if they don't have a Social Security number, right? So if you are the head of a household, and there are folks in that household who are getting premium tax credits, you have to file taxes. There's no way around that rule. If you don't have a Social Security number, you're not eligible for a Social Security number, the way to go is to get an ITIN so that you can file those taxes and reconcile the premium tax credits that you've received for the year. So just like with medical assistance, the immigration status of ineligible household members doesn't change. That doesn't change the rules about whose income must be reported and verified. So, you know, the typical example here is the undocumented parent applying for a dependent U.S. citizen child. The parent has to report and verify his or her income when applying for marketplace subsidies, right? Now, the parent's income will be prorated when the subsidies are calculated. And so what that means is, you know, the premium tax credit, if you are only expected to pay 2% of your income on premiums every month, the income that will be counted in a household of 2, this is a household of 2 with an undocumented parent and a U.S. citizen child, the undocumented parent's income will be prorated, which in this case means it'll be cut in half, right? Because it's only the U.S. citizen child who's getting health care coverage, only half of the income will be counted. So it'll be 2% of the undocumented parents, of half of the undocumented parent's income will be the premiums that this household is expected to pay. You know, the income has to be reported and verified, but there is an extra step for mixed status families when the marketplace is calculating what the premium tax credits will be for those households. Some advocacy tips when dealing with the health insurance marketplace. When submitting documents, upload them if you can. And if you're mailing them in, include the page in the notice that includes the barcode. What we found is that if documents are just submitted without that barcode page, they tend to get lost and never processed. So include the barcode page if you have it. For folks who are calling into the call center on their own, advise them to always ask for an interpreter. We have found that even people who call and are very obviously limited English proficient, they don't get interpreters as easily as people who know to ask for the interpreter. So if you can kind of coach your client a little bit to make that request for an interpreter, it's much more likely they'll get the interpreter on the phone and can communicate directly with the call center. When you're calling the call center on behalf of your client's issues, ask to speak to a supervisor when you're trying to resolve an immigrant-related issue. We have found that a lot of the people who are on the front lines answering these phone calls don't necessarily have the knowledge that they need to resolve immigrant-related issues. They tend to be a little more complex, I think, than a lot of the other calls these folks are getting. So ask to speak with a supervisor. Ask for an escalation. Once you ask for an escalation, they have to respond to that request within 30 days. And so it puts your issue it marks your issue for special attention, and it puts them on a clock, you know, so there's some accountability involved. They have to get back with you in no more than 30 days with a resolution. Ask for a special enrollment period. Even when you think they might not be eligible. What we've found is that, especially for immigrants, supervisors especially feel empowered to grant special enrollment periods whenever possible. We'll talk in a minute about people leaving Medicaid and going onto the marketplace. I think especially in those instances where people are losing general assistance medical assistance or emergency medical assistance, and their only option now is to, their only option for healthcare coverage now is to get into the marketplace outside of open enrollment, especially in those instances if you want to call and say, is there a special enrollment period available for my client? Once you're at the stage where you're picking health plans, it's important, especially with immigrants, to review those plan choices carefully, ask folks what kind of health care they need and where they want to access health care. Immigrants tend to have, a much more narrow options in terms of providers. They want, if they can, they want to stay with providers they know. They want to stay with providers who speak their language. They oftentimes will, know one part of your city, and will have a lot of trouble venturing out into different parts of the city, so they might want to stay close to home. They are less likely, it seems, to understand what a premium is, what a deductible is, what a primary care provider is, what a referral is for a specialist. And so going through those things with your immigrant clients is very helpful in terms of actually allowing them to access health care once they have health care coverage. Appeal. We don't know a whole lot about this appeal process within the marketplace yet, and it doesn't seem like a whole lot of people do. So appeal, you have 90 days to file an appeal, and that's 90 days from the date, the mailing date of the notice that the marketplace is issued. Appeals are now being accepted by mail and by fax. Fax is the newest method of filing an appeal with the marketplace. I put the appeal form, the marketplace appeal form, in your handouts, so you have a copy of them. We are really interested in hearing about appeal processes. If anybody knows about them, has done them already, or will be doing them in the near future, we would really like to hear about that. All right, so a little bit about moving between these two bureaucracies, between the County Assistance Office and the marketplace. If there is a choice, if people have a choice, if they're trying to decide, what do I do? I could go and purchase insurance on the marketplace, or I could apply for medical assistance. If they have a choice to make, the better choice is always medical assistance. Now, this might be a little bit confusing because you're thinking, I thought people had to take Medicaid if they can, and they do. If people are eligible for federal Medicaid, they have to take Medicaid. They can't choose to go on to the marketplace. But for those people who are ineligible for federal Medicaid and they're thinking about getting state-funded medical assistance or emergency medical assistance or going onto the marketplace, the choice there, we believe medical assistance is always the better one. It's better coverage, it's much cheaper, it's free, and medical assistance tends to be better suited for low-income, low-literacy clients than the marketplace does. Applicants who are denied medical assistance coverage are referred to the marketplace, as we all know. These referrals seem to be working a little bit better than they did before, but we still encourage people to proactively apply, so go ahead and submit your medical assistance application separately from the marketplace referral. I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago that losing emergency medical assistance or state-funded medical assistance does not count as losing minimum essential coverage for purposes of getting a special enrollment period. So losing those types of medical assistance won't get you automatically a special enrollment period, but we still encourage you to ask for one. Like we said, they seem to be very willing to give special enrollment periods, especially to immigrants, just because the system has been so flawed for immigrants especially. and has resulted in many immigrants falling through the cracks and not getting the coverage that they're eligible for. Just go ahead and ask for one. The worst they can do is say no. Once a client becomes eligible for federal Medicaid, immediately apply for MA and drop, or for federal Medicaid or for state-funded MA. Immediately apply for MA and drop marketplace coverage. So this could be somebody who was on the marketplace because they couldn't get federal Medicaid. They were 5-year barred, and so their only option was the marketplace, so it could be somebody who was 5-year barred, couldn't get federal Medicaid, or somebody who is 5-year barred and whose income was a little too high for state-funded MA. When that person either gets their 5 years or their income goes low enough to be eligible for state-funded MA, what we advise people to do is apply for MA at that point, drop the marketplace coverage. Again, because medical assistance is cheaper, the coverage is usually better, and medical assistance usually works better for low-income and low-literacy clients. So with the marketplace especially, there are always changes happening. The marketplace is always trying to make improvements, issuing new policy to work out all of the kind of flaws and the kinks that in the system that have reared their ugly heads along the way over the last couple of years. So you want to keep in touch with the national experts on this to have a direct link with all of these changes. These are 3 ways to do that. The National Health Law Program runs this in the loop list, which is very useful. The National Immigration Law Center has a list, the Coalition for Immigrant Equity and Healthcare, I think, which can be very useful for issues specific to immigrants. And then the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities has this Health Reform Beyond the Basics website, which I go to a lot. It has a lot of really great webinars and other kind of community ed materials, not only explaining how this works for immigrants, but for everyone trying to deal with the marketplace. So look at each of those websites if you haven't already. If you are looking to refer people to lawyers, there are a couple of options. We are one of them. We're here in Philadelphia. We can represent low-income immigrants in Philadelphia, and then we can also represent low-income undocumented immigrants from outside of Philadelphia. This is our address and phone number. We see new clients in our office on Mondays and Wednesdays from 9 a.m. until 12 noon. There are other options besides us, if I can get to it. The Community Justice Project, they also represent low-income folks. They don't represent people from Philadelphia. These are their 2 offices, one in Hazleton and one in Reading. You can refer people there. The Health Law Project, they do not have income limits, so people do not have to be low income to use the Health Law Project, and they have a phone intake process. There's their phone number there. This is contact information for me and for Lydia. If you have questions, we're happy to hear them. If you have tips that we haven't talked about today, we're also happy to hear them. Like I said, if you are dealing with a marketplace appeal, we're especially interested in that because we've seen so few of them. The only thing we ask is that you don't give this information out to clients. If you have clients, the best way to get them to us is through our intake process. All right. So we have about 9 minutes or so for questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you so much. Covered a lot of really important ground. Okay, so we have a couple questions coming in. I just want to remind people that you can type your question into the question box. Also, if you have other workarounds or other solutions, specifically with marketplace appeals that you want to share with everyone, please type that in too, and we can share that with the group. So first question is the requirement that the caseworker help an individual apply for a Social Security number a state or a federal rule?
That's a good question. I don't know for sure. I know that it certainly is a statewide rule, so every county assistance office in the state should be doing that. My guess is that it's a federal rule, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. Next question is there a way to renew emergency medical assistance quickly if a medical condition is ongoing past the approved time?
I think the way to give yourself the best shot at getting emergency medical assistance renewed is to, in advance of the date that emergency medical assistance is scheduled to end, submit to the county assistance office proof that the emergency medical condition continues and that the treatment for that condition continues. So, for example, if you had a client who was getting EMA for cancer, say, and they're scheduled to end that emergency medical assistance on October 15th, I would want to very soon, like today, if I could, get to the county assistance office an emergency medical condition verification form, at least, that says that this person still has cancer and will need treatment at least through whatever it is, through April 2016. That should work with the case with cancer because our EMA policy says that cancer should be EMA should be approved to treat cancer. If you have a different type of condition that's not cancer or dialysis or anything else that's typically approved for EMA, it might be a little more difficult. But the other piece of this is that if you get to October 15th and they haven't agreed to approve another 6 months of EMA or whatever it is, file an appeal. File an appeal of the termination right away so that you can keep EMA on for that person while you work out with the county assistance office what they need to continue EMA.
Great. Okay, I just want to remind folks that we still have 5 more minutes for questions. If anyone has questions or comments, feedback, things that you do to help immigrants and refugees overcome some of these barriers. Okay, so I will take a liberty then and ask a question for Mary Pat. I know a challenge that we saw working with people that were native Burmese speakers is just getting information from DHS in languages other than Spanish, and even sometimes it's very challenging to get good information in Spanish. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I know you mentioned their legal responsibilities regarding limited English proficient speakers, but just practically, can you reinforce some of the tips around supporting clients whose native English language is not English?
Yeah, right. So, like I mentioned, I think taking every opportunity to put in writing to the county assistance office what your client's language needs are is always a good first step. Following up, making sure that they've been accurately coded in CIS with the right language. Whenever these limited English proficient folks get a notice written in the wrong language, taking that opportunity to file an appeal. You can file an appeal just of the fact that they got a notice in the wrong language. but you know, if it's a termination, for example, of medical assistance, and they've received notice in the wrong language, make sure you argue when in your appeal that any of the appeal deadlines that would have applied to them otherwise should not apply because the notice was written in the wrong language. Arming your client with I Speak cards. So now I know in Philadelphia we have, the city of Philadelphia has created these cards that people can carry around with them in a number of languages that say on one side I speak English or I speak Burmese, and then on the other side, well, on one side it says I speak Burmese in English, and on the other side it says I speak Burmese in Burmese, so that people can have an easy way to tell anybody that they encounter what their language is and what their language needs are. And you know, if after you've taken all these steps you're still not getting language services you need, I'd say that you should be considering whether you should be filing a complaint with the Department of Health and Human Services. Their Office of Civil Rights accepts complaints from individuals, but also from community organizations who are representing limited English proficient people. Those complaints can be really helpful, and it gets the welfare department to pay, or the Department of Human Services to pay more attention. If they know that the federal government is breathing down its back and is investigating them for violating the Civil Rights Act, they are more likely to comply when people are taking some official action, like a complaint.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And then the other just clarifying question, because I know this is an issue that a lot of people deal with, applying to the marketplace for someone who is ineligible due to the 5-year bar. Even though you're confident that someone is not eligible because of the 5-year bar, but they can get tax credits, you would say to do the Compass application first, and then, you know, to set that in motion to get the official denial to prove ineligibility, and then do the marketplace application? I guess what I'm saying is, do you feel more comfortable with people applying to the marketplace once they have the denial in hand, or do you feel like it's appropriate for someone to submit the Compass application and then in the same day submit the marketplace application and answer to the question of, has the person been denied Medicaid? Yes, expecting that they will be. What do you think is the best way to handle that?
I would not advise anyone to answer that question on the marketplace application unless they have actually been denied Medicaid. You want to be as honest as possible. I would say that you don't want to say no to that until you actually have a denial for Medicaid. So if that not since I don't do a whole lot of marketplace applications, I'm having trouble kind of visualizing the timeline with the marketplace application. I don't see any problem submitting both applications at the same time, so that you're at least getting the marketplace application started, and then once you have the Medicaid denial in hand, you can just go in and say, answer that question accurately.
Right.
Makes sense?
Right. That does make sense, and I think that's an important, planning tip for everyone, because, we could start those Compass applications now so that when November 1st happens, people that are subject to the 5-year bar but can get tax credits already have their Medicaid denials in hand on November 1st and don't have to wait, an additional month. So yeah, I think that's a timing issue.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions, and we are at 12:30. So I'm just going to thank you again for this great presentation. Thank everyone for joining us, and remind folks that by the end of the day, I will send out a link to the recording, Mary Pat's presentation, and all the handouts. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email them to myself or Mary Pat. And just thank you again for a great presentation.
Thank you.